Hey everyone, Coomber Radio, episode number 296. So today, we're going to talk about an awful lot of stuff. I think you are in for an absolute treat. This guest I've known for a long time. I would describe her as a dear friend. She does incredible things in the industry. A part of the industry I am not involved in, so that is a good thing. She's, got her wheelhouse and her expertise, which is going to be great today. We're also going to talk about a topic which I think is very prevalent and is getting a lot more steam in the fitness industry. And it's great to talk to this guest because she's been through it. She's helping other people go through it. She uses a lot of empowering techniques and exercise methodologies to help people with following their own form of strength, because everyone's got strength. They just haven't fully discovered where and what that strength really looks like. Anyway, enough of me talking, which isn't the point of the show. It's just to hear the guest. Nicola Jane Hobbs, hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Have you done any yoga this morning?
I have done some yoga this morning, yes. A few handstands, a bit of meditation, get myself in the zone.
Mate, I love handstands. They do end up being shoulder press handstands because I'm a guy and that's kind of remotely more alpha, but I love them.
Yeah, this is the thing. Men have a tendency to hold handstands through brute strength. Whereas actually when you get into yoga, you're like, you need a little bit less strength and a bit more softness, and then you can hold it through balance.
See, this girl knows what she's talking about. So, Nicola, you are a yoga teacher. We've just mentioned that is part of your thing. That's why I asked. Talk to me about your background coming into the fitness industry, because you've got an amazing story, an amazing journey. And I want to really delve into all the different layers of that today to be able to help people listening to this as much as humanly possible.
Of course. So I'll try and summarise, but like you say, there's quite a lot of different elements and different paths that I've taken. But I think what first started me on this path was when I was 15, I'd say I was diagnosed with anorexia and depression. And even now, looking back, I don't know what caused it. I'm not really sure what mattered, but my journey out of it, I think, is what most people will benefit from. So I'd rather focus on that. And so I went through a lot of traditional treatments, like cognitive behavioural therapy. I spent some time in eating disorder hospitals on kind of different refeeding regimes just to get your weight up to a level that's stable. I think for me, especially, things really had a bit of a wake-up call. Like, I still carried on doing my GCSEs, doing my A-levels. I got a scholarship to Reading to study psychology. And in that first year, I really struggled with not knowing whether that was the right thing for me to do. And my go-to coping mechanism for that was just to not eat properly and to not look after myself. And I basically finished that first year weighing 25 kilos. I had organ failure, and the only way to describe it is that I felt like I was dying. And at that point, I kind of felt, right, if I get through this, then I've got to seriously try and do something meaningful with my life. And so for me, that was, like I said, it was a wake-up call. It kind of redirected my purpose. And, from that point, it took me a long time, a good couple of years to regain my health and regain weight and regain strength. And one of the tools that I used for that was yoga. And I stumbled across it by accident when I joined a gym. And I know that you've had recently on here Lou Schuler, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah, and his book was the first book I ever read and ever bought about kind of fitness or weightlifting. And it was, what's it called? The New Rules of Lifting for Women. Yeah, lift like a man, look like a goddess, or something like that. And it was a 12-week plan, and I was like, right, I think at this point I got my weight up to about 35 kilos, and I was like, right, I'm just going to follow this and kind of see what happens. And over that time, I think I gained something like a stone. And for someone who's spent their life trying to lose weight, kind of in this cycle of anorexia, and then maybe going into hospital to be refed, and then coming out and losing that weight again, this was like an incredibly empowering experience. And the gym that I was, it was just like a normal kind of health club gym. They were running yoga classes, and I just thought, I'll give yoga a try, because I think before that point I'd always thought, now you're kind of just sitting there and stretching and you're not really doing much. But I kind of just got on my mat and I was like, this is a completely different way of experiencing my body. So rather than my body being something that I wanted to control or I wanted to have power over, it kind of completely flipped it, whereas you're kind of looking inside for the power that's within your body. And I kind of thought, oh, this is amazing, and I wanted to carry on exploring it more. So I went to Thailand, trained as a yoga teacher with your mum.
Met your small world.
Such a small world. I know she's doing amazing stuff with goat yoga now, which is which I haven't tried, but it looks very interesting. And then I kind of thought, okay, so this is, I come from a science background, a psychology background, where, and I like that. I like, the evidence base behind everything. But yet here I am on this kind of transformational path that involves spirituality and yoga and meditation. And I wanted to explore more kind of, and this is what really excites me now, is how we can kind of build a bridge between science and spirituality. So once I trained as a yoga teacher, I came back to the UK, did my master's degree in sport and exercise psychology. And I studied post-traumatic growth. So the way that when you go through some kind of traumatic experience or adversity, you can either remain devastated by it or you can grow stronger from it. So you can thrive through it, which is what my book Thrive Through Yoga is all about. And then, so little adjunct to my story is while I was there, because about 50% of the course was about how you can kind of use exercise for healing and for health. And the other 50% was about how you can improve performance, sports performance, like high level, elite performance, using different kind of mental training tools, different strategies. And I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to be working with these athletes, then I want to know what it feels like to be under that kind of pressure. So the only club that was kind of there when I studied at Brunel, and the only club that was there was Olympic weightlifting. So I just thought, I've kind of done a bit of like resistance training in the gym and I can move quite well, so I'll just give it a go. And I think for 8 weeks, I was given a broomstick and I wasn't allowed on the platform. And my coach, who's very old school, he just taught me the technique with a broomstick, and I was the only girl on the team. And because this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and CrossFit wasn't as big then, so there weren't as many women doing kind of Olympic lifting.
Yeah.
And kind of slowly, I just loved it. That kind of, I suppose it is what we call flow now, getting in that peak performance state. And I was applying things that I learned from the more mindset side of yoga, and obviously things that I was learning on my course into my lifting. And I've won the English Championships twice, and I still train now. I don't compete anymore, which we can come back to, but one of the reasons I stopped competing was because it was a weight categorized sport, and I decided that actually always knowing my weight and always kind of having to control my weight isn't something that's good for me. So I lift, I enjoy it, I may compete one day in the future, I don't know. And then at this point, I found a lot of freedom, and I was recovered from anorexia. I was weight restored, periods had returned, and things like that. And so I went on, but I kind of felt there's still like part of myself that my recovery had almost felt a little bit shallow, and I wanted to explore things a bit deeper, which is when I really got into the more meditative side. And I don't know, I think a lot of people, sometimes they wake up when they're 50 or 60 and they kind of think, I've got the body I want, I've got the business I want, I've got the house, I've got the family, but is there something more? What else is there? And that's when I started to become more in touch with, the spiritual side of things, and actually looking a bit deeper and thinking, what do I want to do with my life? What are my real values and things like that? And for me, it was, part of it was sharing yoga and helping people through the different things in their life, using all these collection of different tools that I kind of learned through psychology and spirituality and yoga and meditation. And it was also, I've always loved writing. So that's when I started getting into writing books. And my first book came out, it's probably like 2.5 years ago now, and it's called Yoga Gym. And that was mainly about the physical side of yoga, about the poses. And then this second book that's just come out called Thrive Through Yoga, it actually shows how my journey has changed, because this is much more about how we can use the poses in yoga as tools for transformation. So I guess that's where I'm at now.
Wow.
Yeah, that's my journey.
But it's good because that's reflected in your books, and I've seen both your books, and they are both very different, but they talk about both. Both books are about skills that we all need to harness. Whether yoga's your thing or weight, whatever's your thing, we need to explore and harness and use it to make ourselves stronger physically, and then we need to go on that mental journey as well. And, so much of the podcast over the last year and a half has been about people's mental journeys because, without that, we are literally lost. So one of the things I'm fascinated by, and I don't know if you've seen it, I watched the programme, I think it was on BBC, it was with Louis Theroux, and it was all about, yes, you watched it, it was all about kind of like 5 or 6 people that were suffering with anorexia. And a lot of them had been sort of hospitalised and they were going through feeding programs and stuff. And to be an observer on other people's, lives in that kind of vulnerability, but to see that kind of perspective that some people have around food, which has perpetuated itself over years and years and years, as someone that is so passionate about health and the body and progression, it was horrible to watch because I sitting there felt totally helpless, and it felt like as someone that cared, I wanted to almost like dive in and be able to do something and just like wave a wand and say like, and I can imagine you've had this with your background and what you've experienced with anorexia, is that almost like people stand in front of you and just go, why can't you see what we're seeing? Why do you see yourself the way you see yourself compared to how we see you? So I'm fascinated to find out, you looking back at the different phases that you went through mentally, how did you see yourself when you were kind of, almost when you were at 25 kilos, when you were going to, feeding and going to 35 kilos to now? Because I think if people can understand how someone might look at themselves in that kind of situation, they can start to see the layers of themselves and help themselves to work through that kind of stuff.
Yeah, now I completely get what you're saying. I think looking back, anorexia is a very extreme end of what a lot of people go through on a day-to-day basis in terms of the way that they see their body. And if you like some of my clients that I work with, some of the things they say about themselves are so kind of destructive, and you're kind of like, there's no wonder that you're feeling down about life when the voices in your head are telling you that you're not worthy. And so when I was in that place, I think for me it felt like I was in a bubble and no one could reach me, and it didn't matter what anyone would say to me, it had no effect on me being able to realize that there was nothing I had to do in order to be worthy. It's almost like a lot of if you read a lot of the research around anorexia and eating disorders, there's a kind of correlation with like perfectionism and being high achieving. And it's about how you can harness that in a way that's going to be helpful rather than harmful. And I think a lot of, when I look back on anorexia, and I think, to be honest, I think it's the same, I don't know whether with your experience of obesity and overeating, I think it's a similar thing. It's when it comes down to it, whether it's caused a disease or a disorder, it's a sense of disconnection. So when your life feels out of control and you feel disconnected, maybe from your real purpose, something that feels that is within your control is your body and what you can eat. And I don't think diet culture helps that necessarily, because it almost puts in our mind that one of the most important goals we have in life is to control the shape of our body. And for me, it got to the point where I was like, I do not want to spend the rest of my life trying to control what my body looks like. I want to place that energy into more meaningful things. But it is a kind of, it's difficult to describe. And even me looking back, there's a lot of the journey that I don't understand. I think when I hit that really low point, and I kind of was, what we call in psychology is like an NDE, like a near-death experience. It was almost when you come that close to death, it wakes you up to the preciousness of life. And then all of a sudden, how big your thighs are probably isn't something that's worth worrying about. But it is, I think you've talked about habits before. And so for me, and for a lot of people who are going through eating disorders, that eating disorder has become a habit. And it's about being able to sit with the discomfort of knowing that maybe your body isn't, or you don't have to control your body. And almost you don't have to base your self-worth on your body. And I use a technique with my clients called the habitual voice recognition technique. So you could also call it the eating disorder voice recognition technique, or the diet mentality recognition technique. So being able to separate you and what you really want and your true values from, that the record that might play in your head that's telling you not to eat that, or that you're fat, or that you need to burn off whatever you've just eaten, or you're not worthy unless you can fit into a size 8 dress or whatever. And so you can sit and you can begin to distinguish between what your real values are and what is just a kind of habitual voice that kind of just nags away at you. And the more you're able to separate those two things, the more you can actually make a choice to live less from habit and more from taking responsibility for your life. And this isn't easy stuff.
No, God, it's not. And I don't mean at any point in this podcast to play down any aspect of your journey or what people go through, because there's only so much that I can understand from my own journey and, who I've coached and helped. When you were kind of in the midst of anorexia, do you remember any of the kind of narrative and the self-talk that you used to have, and kind of almost how destructive it was? And I suppose, like you said, with habit, you end up being in your own echo chamber, that's the only thing that you hear.
And you think that's who you are. Like, I didn't realise there was another side of me beyond kind of the anorexia. I thought, well, that is me. For the rest of my life, I'm going to be stuck, with this kind of mindset. But I mean, to be honest, this was what I would say I've been recovered for probably 5 years. And probably 5 years before that, is when I really struggled. And I've forgotten a lot of it, which in a way I think is a good thing.
Yeah, sure.
And I've written another book which is called Fear-Free Food, and that's about very much healing from any kind of disordered relationship with food, because I thought, if I don't write this book now, I'm probably going to forget all those things I went through. But I mean, I think there were even just feelings like I just lived in this constant state of anxiety, as if something was going to go wrong, and as if the whole world was against me, kind of thing. And I think a lot of people still go through that. We live in this really distracted world, which is, I guess a good way of describing it is I kind of lived, my ego was very much in control. Like my whole worth was judged on what I weighed and what I ate, and I had this constant kind of calorie counter in my head that I just couldn't, no matter what I did, I just couldn't switch it off. And that's when, for me, meditation became really powerful, because it taught me to just sit with discomfort rather than numb it by starving myself or by over-exercising, or to run from it, again, by using techniques which are probably not healthy. And it also taught me how to almost be aware of the thoughts about calories, about my weight, about my body, but without giving them any meaning in my life, by kind of reframing them as this is just an automatic thought that's coming from my lower brain, my kind of reptilian brain. And actually, as a human, I have this higher brain, which gives me consciousness over whether I listen to those thoughts that are telling me to count calories, or to skip a meal, or that I need to weigh less. And I have a choice whether I listen to that and react to it, or whether I accept that it's there and get on with my life. So it's like almost like a radio is playing in the background the whole time, with all these thoughts being kind of chucked out at you. And then over time, the more you can kind of be aware of these thoughts but not react to them, that radio gets turned down until slowly those thoughts just fizzle out. And I suppose that's where I'm at now, is that I don't have eating disorder thoughts anymore. And there was, 5-10 years ago, I never thought that would happen. And people say you can't you can't recover from an eating disorder. You can only manage it, and I think that is complete rubbish. Honestly.
Yeah, when people say that, you know, people can't change, or, you know, I and I know you've listened to it. I recently did a podcast about my experience with Tony Robbins, and
Yeah.
I didn't intend at any point for my narrative post that event to be the thing. It's changed things for me on kind of like an innate human level. But we've all got aspects of our character that we either think are positive or negative and are going to lead us forward or backwards. And, you know, going into certain situations and working through certain processes allows you to, you know, really maximize your focus on energy on all the things that are going to drive you forwards, and literally give no time and attention to all the things that are potentially going to drag you back. So it's not like at any point that the things that dragged you back are completely gone, but you've literally wrapped them in chains, you know, wrapped them in foil, chucked them in the ocean, and they're there with weeds on them. You know, there's just no attention there.
Yeah.
They're at the depths of the ocean in your brain, and you've accelerated all the aspects of your personality that are going to take you forward. And I think sometimes people try and view emotions in absolute senses, and it's like you've just framed brilliantly conscious and subconscious thought and how our brains work, in that a thought comes in and we have the choice to process it in a multitude of ways. And we can just, and I think this is something that is a problem currently in society, that is we don't take enough time to think for ourselves and think about our actions. But if a thought comes into our brain, we have the choice to stand back and say, right, this thought, this is how I want to process this, and actually just go. And this is where you've seen the power of meditation. Meditation's allowed you to sit down and go, okay, all these thoughts, I'm not going to try and ignore them. That's impossible.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and be at one with these thoughts, and I'm going to put them in different boxes for different uses, and I'm going to focus on the ones that I really want to take forward in my life.
Yeah, and I think Pema Chodron, she's a Buddhist nun, but she writes in a way that's very accessible. And what she wrote, something that I read years ago, and it's always stuck with me, and it's, you are the sky, everything else is just the weather. So your thoughts are just the weather. And we have a meditation technique in yoga that we use quite a lot, and it's kind of what I call just a passing cloud meditation, in that you see yourself, you are literally the sky, and you visualize each thought that pops into your mind as a cloud, and you just watch it pass. So you don't get tied into the storyline, you just let it go. And some people, you know, it depends what kind of visualizations work for you. Some people kind of visualize their thoughts as like a leaf floating down a river and just letting it go. And I think that's something that we don't actually, in the West, we don't tap into enough. It's just this idea of letting it go. Whatever doesn't serve you, just let it go. You don't need to cling to it, even if it was, you know, part of your personality for so many years, and you don't want to be that person anymore. Then you can just let that part go. Like for me, anorexia was such a huge part of my identity for so many years, and I was like, you know what, this isn't giving me anything anymore. I've got to let it go, and I've got to be prepared that the space that this creates in my life is going to feel uncomfortable. But you know, and when that happens, it's so tempting to fill this space with more stuff that actually may not serve you. And actually sometimes you've just got to sit in that really uncomfortable space and just see what happens without any goal, just accepting that this is, you know, you've got the rest of your life to kind of figure out who you are and what you want. And sometimes, you know, just questioning and waiting and, you know, never actually getting somewhere, that's okay too.
I'm really glad you brought that up. It was about 2 or 3 years ago, and he obviously made this video off the back of this theory. But I think his name's Prince Evra, and he's really popular on Facebook.
Yes.
Yeah, if I got his name right, is it Prince
Yeah,
Evra?
I don't know, but I think I've seen the video.
Yeah, and he sits there and he goes, right, and he's basically talking about depression and mental well-being, and he was saying, look, let's view the sky, your mind as a sky, and the clouds just come and they go. And he put it beautifully, and I remember sharing this video on Facebook, and a couple of comments were like, yeah, agree. And then this woman started to get like really irate, and then this guy, and then a couple of other people, and I was like, shit, like I've upset some people here.
Yeah.
And then this woman come on, and she wrote this beautiful story of like, I totally agree with this. I've suffered from depression. You know, it's so hard to see what Princess Eva is talking about, but once you're able to detach yourself from the current situation and start to see each thought as an isolated emotion, and you can choose to contextualize them differently. And it was a beautiful bit of narrative, and people weren't reading it. And because something like depression, however it's manifested, or some, you know, any kind of mental disorder, if we want to call it a disorder, you know, people were getting really emotional about it. You know, there was people that felt they were currently suffering from it. There was people that had family members, and I felt really frustrated that people wouldn't stop for a second, detach themselves from the current emotion of pain around what it was that they were suffering about, and see what was being talked about. Because this woman had written such a beautiful narrative about her story, and people were just jumping on. They were like, Ben, you're an idiot, you don't understand depression, you've never... And I'm like, I'm not saying I understand. And I ended up deleting the Facebook post because it seemed like it was upsetting a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I also felt that in my current knowledge and ability level, I wasn't able to truly serve the people that were kind of like in that place that needed help. So I ended up deleting it. But it was such an amazing and beautiful video. But it was so painful to see so many people that wouldn't just stop for a minute and think about what the core of the message was.
Yeah, I think you can get very attached to your suffering. I think when you're in that place and you can get almost tied in, you end up feeling like a victim, and something that I've it's difficult when you're, like you said, when you went to see Tony Robbins, you felt that you had a change that was on like a really deep level. So I think you can have an intellectual understanding of something, and then you have an insightful understanding of something, and what it sounds like you went through had a really deep, insightful understanding of something, of what Tony Robbins was saying. And when you're kind of in that state of depression, it's really difficult to access that kind of insightful understanding, because you are so trapped in your pain. And I think it takes a long, you have to be open to receiving these kind of messages, because you're bringing your own biases and your own perspective of what it's like to live with depression. And it almost, you become defensive of your diagnosis in a way. And for me, it was always like, I got to the point where I was like, right, I don't care if the doctor doesn't say I've recovered. I've discharged myself from my diagnosis. I no longer want that label. But I went through, 3 or 4 years of really intense treatment before I got to that place where I could say that. So it's almost like you've got to be at a place in your life where you're ready to do the work. And a lot of people, they're not ready to do this deep inner work because it is painful, and it is almost like you're unpeeling all these kind of layers of yourself and all these kind of barriers and these walls that you've put up. And so for some people, it's too much, and they'll kind of run back into their comfort zone, I suppose. And whenever kind of anyone asks me what anorexia or depression is like, I would say it's like a cozy little hell, because it's horrendous to live there, but it's known.
Yeah.
There's no.
It's safe to a degree.
It's safe, yeah. And and for some people, including me in the past, I would rather live in the hell of something that was known than risk the joy of something that was unknown. But now I'm completely the opposite, and I'm just like we were saying earlier, just a couple of weeks ago decided to sell my flat. No idea what I'm going to do, and yet now that excites me. So it's kind of you can completely transform your life, and this is kind of. Have you heard of consciousness hacking?
Not. I might have heard of what you might talk, but not that phrase. I've never heard that phrase. No.
It's interesting, and it's basically some. I think his name is Mikey Segal, and he's coined this term, and it's to do with accessing the states of awareness in the same way that meditation does, but so that without kind of the spiritual aspect, in a very scientific way.
Okay.
And I can't remember where I was going with this. But
Sorry, I was going to try and cue you. You said conscious attacking.
Consciousness hacking, sorry.
Hacking.
Yeah,
Got you.
consciousness hacking. So
Okay.
you're almost like you're hacking into these higher levels of consciousness. And I suppose it's what meditation gives you. So when you're coming out of depression, it's almost like you're at a different level. And when you begin healing, so I would say depression is like a -5, it's kind of where you are. And then you come back to normal, which is a 0, which is where kind of a lot of us are, we have goals, we do, pay the mortgage or whatever. And then you begin meditating or consciousness hacking or accessing, having insights like you have, and you take your kind of level of being in the world up to like a +5 or a +10. And that's what thriving is about. It's about realizing that, say you're recovering from anorexia or depression, it's not just going from this -5 of illness to this 0 of okay and recovered. It's about realizing you can go even further than that, and you can keep on growing and you can keep on thriving, and that there's no kind of limit to what your kind of experience of the world is.
Yeah, from what you've said in a conversation I actually had with a family member, I was talking again about my kind of Tony Robbins experience. And if I think about where we place our energy, if I was to just hypothetically say that we had 12 boxes of emotions in our body, and one of those boxes the fear of something, another of the box is self-acceptance, another box is self-worth, and we've got all these boxes, and these boxes have a certain amount of negative and positive energy in them, and they have a certain amount of potential to have negative and positive energy. So you can't have loads of positive energy in a potential area of fear, but you can become accepting of that fear and use it for a positive force, but it will never become as energetic as maybe your level of self-worth or acceptance can do. And so I was talking to this family member about this Tony Robbins experience, and they just said to me, they said, how was it? And I said, it was life-changing. And they said, how? And I said, and I tried to verbalize it, and because the reasons were so personal to me, there was only so far I could go with sharing how that experience had affected my journey as a person. And this family member said, yeah, well, to me, life-changing means that you quit your job or you move to the other side of the world, and I'm like, okay, that's a physical change in your life. But also there's a lot of connotations there of moving away from something. Moving away from the current state of play. But I want to move closer. I want to be all in 100% to where my current state of being is. And if everyone was to look at me from the external now and look at the social media, the podcast, everything that I've created, everything that I do and believe in myself, I've literally doubled it. That's how I can describe it right now. So my ability to believe in myself, my fear of failure, all of that shit, I've just I've reduced the negativity by half, and I've doubled the positivity by 100% again. And that's why I describe to people, going through this experience, I walked out of that 4 days with Tony Robbins like I'd put on a superhero cape. And I was like, come on, let's go.
Yeah.
And that, don't get me wrong, is quite transformative in 4 days. And I had to get to quite a high level of seeing to accept everything that was going to be taught. And what you've just described over, what was a long journey for you, you're basically constantly transferring energy from all these boxes, from one box to the next, filling some up with positivity, reducing that negativity through the process and the habit of positive movement, positive thought, positive feeding. And I don't want us to now start to say, okay, positivity is really important, because what we're getting at is all the areas of your health, body and mind that need positive action.
Yes.
But you have to be willing to identify where there's not positive action and start somewhere. And I think when we talk about pain, that's what a huge amount of people struggle with, because they can't see how to start when there's so much pain.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about kind of positive actions, I think it's really important. We're not saying you've got to think positive thoughts the whole time, because it's not like we're trying to change say if we're feeling down, it's not like we're trying to change that feeling kind of sad into feeling happy. It's about saying, okay, I feel sad. I accept that I feel sad, and I'm going to allow myself to feel sad, but I'm not going to wallow in it, and I trust that it's going to pass. So like for me, like I lost my dad to cancer actually a year ago on Sunday, and it was a horrendous experience, but because of what I'd been through, and I guess the tools that I'd learned in my own healing, I kind of was like, I feel heartbroken, I feel grief, I feel loss, but these things aren't going to last forever. And even now, a year on, it's still kind of, I'll be driving my car or washing up the dishes, and I'll feel like my heart break a little bit, and then I feel down for maybe it might be 5 minutes, it might be for a couple of days, but I know that that's not going to last. And I think understanding that is really key, is that nothing is permanent. Like life is change, and we need to adapt to that. We need to understand that trying to keeping things exactly the same is almost like where that suffering comes from. If we can allow ourselves to be like, okay, we're going to feel happy, we're going to feel sad, we're going to feel excited, we're going to feel peaceful, and we don't want to fight any of these feelings, but equally we don't have to get caught up in them either. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. One of the things I want to pick up on is the kind of narrative that we give to ourselves. One of the things that I was looking at in your book is our use of language and how we talk to ourselves, which is obviously how we've already talked about this a little bit, because I was intrigued as to the language that you used about yourself when you're in the depths of anorexia. How do people go about identifying the language that they use for themselves and going through the process of starting to change the narrative that they have about themselves and how they feel?
Well, I think the first point of any change is self-awareness. You've got to start with learning how to sit down and be still and be with yourself. We live in this world that's full of distractions, and we act so habitually that we don't know. We're not aware of the language that we're using towards ourselves or about ourselves. But I mean, I think journaling is an incredible way of beginning to understand yourself. And even if, like, sometimes when I'm in a conversation, I'll say something and I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that about myself. So I think if you can pick up the language that when you're writing that you start using, if you keep using words like powerless and helpless and victim, you'll be like, okay, I need to do a little bit of work there. And if you consciously start using words in relation to growth and thriving and hope and faith, then it changes the way that you see the world. I remember when I did my degree, we studied for quite a long time on whether thought comes before language or language comes before thought, which is a really interesting concept. So by changing the way that we speak and the words that we use, we can actually change the way that we feel, rather than necessarily having to change the way we feel and then change the words that we use to describe ourselves. And I also think it's really interesting to look at words that they have in different countries. Like, I think it's in Japan they have a concept called ikigai, which we don't have in our language, and it means your reason for getting up in the morning. And I think because we don't have a word for that, it's almost like we don't even think about it. Whereas actually, I know you had a conversation with Tom about Man's Search for Meaning and Viktor Frankl. We all need a meaning in our life. We all need a reason to get up in the morning. And so when we start exploring kind of all these different words and different languages, it actually gives our brain the capacity to open to these different concepts.
I had a client probably about 2 or 3 months ago, and she didn't have a reason to get out of bed. And the days that she struggled the most is when she didn't have work. And obviously work is a huge amount of people's purpose in life. It's why we get up, for many days. And she said, I'll often stay in bed till lunchtime, mid-afternoon. I was like, wow. I was like, I've literally never done that. The only time I ever lay in bed myself is when I'm just feeling a bit cozy, or I want to read the book, or I'm just messing about on my phone for a bit.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm pretty much out of bed when I wake up because I have a purpose. And I think people have to identify with that. As soon as you're struggling to get up in the morning, even if there's even if you enjoy your work at its core, there's obviously stuff that's troubling you in your work environment. And I remember I went through a 3-month period in the summer when I was struggling to get out of bed, and it was because there was aspects of my work I was no longer enjoying, or I was finding those bits of my work frustrating. Like, I didn't want to get out of bed and actually do it. So what did I do? I stayed in bed. But it actually took me a while to identify, right, how am I going to sort this? And there wasn't a way for me to sort it quickly. That's the reality. I couldn't say, okay, I'll just stop doing that work. That work had to be done for me to get to the next phase of my journey and what I was creating. And I then just had to refocus my emotion in the, right, I've got to do this stuff because I want to get to this and this place, and I want to do this, so I have to do this work. So it was about reframing where I was going to do the work that I had to do to take the step that I knew that would be enjoyable. And, I think sometimes we get very focused on the thing that we've got to do rather than the thing that we want out of
the process.
Yeah.
So like you said, it's like you had to find meaning in the work that you were doing right now, and your meaning was to get you to the next phase. And that's where I think doing the inner work is really important, because it helps you find meaning in whatever you're doing, even if it's like your everyday experiences. I love watching the sunset. That experience of awe is that, that if I've watched the sunset, I've had a successful day. I don't judge my success on these kind of external goals. It's much more on how you bring purpose into your life, and what your values are. And unless you actually sit down and reflect on them, you can go through your whole life and not really know what those values are. So, like I mentioned with my dad, it was probably about a week before he died, I said to him, if you can give me one piece of advice that I can take with me for the rest of my life, what would it be? And he said, be kind. And I was like, that's it. That's kind of, that's my core value. If I can be kind in every way, then that means I'm kind of living my purpose. I'm bringing meaning.
But I think
into life.
And that is beautiful. But I think right now so many people will be thinking, be kind to others. But firstly, you've got to say, be kind to yourself.
100%. And I don't, especially if you're in a kind of service role, if you're a coach, you can't take your clients further than you've been yourself. So therefore, if you have not been on, this journey, if you don't know how to look after yourself, how can you, be encouraging that in your clients? Like, realistically, it's not like we're off meditating in caves. We live in, a real world. We have mortgages to pay. We have clients to look after. But if you are saying to your clients, make sure you get 8 hours sleep, make sure you relax, but then you're so stressed that you're having 4 or 5 hours a night, sleep a night, it's almost like you're never going to feel like you're being authentic. You're never going to feel like you're living your values with them. So like you say, it's about being kind to yourself. And this is what I think only over probably the last few months I've realised that is an interpretation that's really important. Being kind to yourself, being kind to others, and also being kind to our planet and to the world, and taking responsibility in terms of basic things like conscious living, like the environment, like plastic. Because one thing that I feel looking back contributed to the issues I went through with mental health is feeling disconnected from something that was bigger than myself. And some people find that in God. Personally, I'm not religious, but it is this sense of feeling deeply connected to the rest of humanity. And when we go through these struggles in our lives, whether it be anorexia or depression or stress, or just feeling a little bit like, unhappy or down, rather than feeling ashamed of those struggles, it's about understanding that the struggles that we go through, they are our connection to humanity. Because whatever we're going through, if we can talk about these things without taboo, we'll probably find that a lot of other people are going through these things too.
So, to wrap up this conversation, which has been amazing, I really value the honesty that you've brought to this conversation, which is brilliant. We've talked a lot about Thrive, your book, Thrive Through Yoga. I know we've talked about some of the points in Thrive. what does the Thrive model look like? For me, I've got the notes here. Take responsibility, have hope, recreate yourself, initiate action, value change, and enjoy the journey. What did each one of those little bits of processes look like for you? And if someone's stuck, how do they action that? Where does the momentum come from for them?
So in terms of taking responsibility, I suppose that is about understanding that I think as adults, we have this amazing opportunity that we get to take responsibility for our health. And I think often we take that for granted and we think things are less within our control, but especially when it comes to the way that we view the world. So I think the first thing for anyone, I would say, is to meditate or to find some way in your life to access that kind of slowing down and that sense of peace, so that you can begin to separate what's habit and what's reactivity from your deeper meaning. So some people it's sitting down and breathing. Some people it's more of an embodied experience like yoga, or you might be able to find it on the weightlifting platform, or going for a walk mindfully, and being able to separate between what is those things that are happening automatically. So almost like if you get an itch, a lot of people just, you automatically scratch it without thinking about it. But understanding that in between the itch and scratching it is a space where you can make a decision whether you're going to scratch that itch. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I think taking responsibility involves that understanding that just because you have an urge to do something, say it could be something like binge eating, or something that a lot of people I know at the moment go through is your phone goes off, you have the urge to check your phone. It doesn't mean you have to check it, especially with people. I know I've spoken quite a lot with people at the moment with a kind of feel like there's like a bit of a social media addiction. I don't like calling these addictions, but obsession going on whereby you feel like you don't have control over how much time you spend on social media, whereas actually you don't have to look at your phone just because you want to look at your phone.
Mm-hmm.
So you can practice that with really simple things like just acknowledging that, again, just being aware that thought is there, and say, you can kind of say out loud to yourself, okay, I'm having this urge to look at my phone, I'm taking 5 long deep breaths, and normally by the time you've taken those 5 long deep breaths, you don't want to look at your phone anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first point. Second point is having hope, and I think hope is, when I talk a lot about spirituality, and for me, spirituality is not. It's not like there's this ghost inside of your body that's kind of just hiding there and you've got to find. To me, spirituality is that part of you that feels like hope. It's living in spirit and living an inspired life, and so it's doing whatever you need to do to get in touch with that side of you, that side of you that feels like hope, or understanding that there is a way out. So it's finding good role models is one way that gives you hope. So if you're going through an eating disorder, find people who've come out of that journey. And actually that is quite difficult to do, because I think once you've been through that journey, a lot of people don't want to talk about it anymore because they're kind of done with their eating disorder and they want to get on with their life. But one good thing about social media is there are people who are speaking out about these things, and it is becoming less and less of a taboo. So yeah, I don't know how you feel about hope.
I think hope sometimes feels like almost like a slightly too fluffy word. And that something,
I know what you mean.
There's almost like there's something missing that's tangible from it. Like what is actually hope? I think hope. I want to contextualize hope in, I hope for better things for myself for the future. So there's an emotion around that. It's a positive emotion, and hopefully, if someone is not feeling a positive emotion towards hope or not feeling hopeful, for me, I have to identify with that on a very functional level. So I have to say, why am I not feeling hopeful? Oh, okay, actually, there's something in my life that's disempowering me. So instead of sitting here and saying, oh, let's try and feel hopeful, which is the same as let's try and be positive, I have the ability to take action to remove that thing that's disempowering me, to allow myself to feel more empowered, which gives me a better sense of hope. So I do identify with the word hope, but only to a degree.
Yeah, and that's really interesting actually, because I think when people feel hopeless, one thing that's really powerful is reinterpreting that feeling of hopelessness as vulnerability. So instead of feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, I've got nowhere to go, if you actually reinterpret it as vulnerability, and if you have you watched Brené Brown's talk on
Yeah,
on the
amazing.
power of vulnerability?
Amazing.
And it's actually about saying, asking for help. So if you are feeling hopeless, if you reinterpret it as vulnerability and realize that that's a sign that you need to go and ask for help.
Perhaps I feel like that because I'm always willing to ask for help. Like I'm willing to just be 100% vulnerable, and I've learnt that.
Yeah, it's a skill. I think it's a practice. Asking for help is a practice.
Yeah.
And it does, for me, I know, like 5 years ago, it didn't come naturally.
Yeah.
And I think we're always so willing to help other people. I think every human would say that they always, be there for someone else. And it's actually realizing that other people will be there for you, and you can be vulnerable, you can be open. And by you being vulnerable with that person, that almost gives them permission to do the same with you. So again, it deepens our connection.
This is where psychology from an evidence-based practice is actually really, really fascinating, because I saw a research paper or a bit of data that they produced on people's Facebook statuses, and they looked at the language people used, and one of the most engaged terminologies on social media was, I need your help. And as soon as someone put that and then explained whatever it was they needed help with, they had colossal amounts of engagement. And it just shows you that, and it proves to you that people really do want to help other people, but you have to be willing to take that step to ask for help. And it feels painful, but if anyone in my friend or family network needed help, I would be there for them straight away and help them, and I wouldn't judge them, because my primary emotion towards that person is I want to help.
Yeah, I mean, as humans, we're a social species. There's something innately within us that wants us. We want the rest of our species to thrive. So I think, if there's any message that can come from this podcast, is that reach out, ask for help, be vulnerable, let your guard down, because it's only by doing that we have the opportunity to help people as well, and as a kind of collective, we can grow together. But anyway, so the third aspect of the Thrive model is recreating yourself. And again, this comes back to what we talked about earlier. So we've kind of covered it, is embracing change. And I think you've talked about it you've spoken about it before, that a lot of people think they're okay with change until it happens, and you're kind of clinging to your old self. Or, I mean, a perfect example is kind of as you're getting older and your body starts to change. And you want to cling to that same body. And I think the more kind of detached we can become from our body's shape, the less suffering our body's going to cause. And it's the same with any area of life. The more attachment we have to something or someone even, the more likely we are to suffer. And that's a Buddhist concept. So I found definitely in my relationships, if you can release that idea of attaching yourself to someone, you get a deeper connection again. And that's kind of what this is all about. It's about deepening our connections and becoming more present to enhance kind of our overall well-being. So I think recreating yourself is just being open to change and kind of letting go of that past kind of identity. So then we've got initiating action, which I think a lot of us, you can't think your way into change. And I think we try and analyse a lot of things, but it's actually, let's put some steps in place. So say you've got issues around your eating, the first step you could take is actually just kind of reflecting on how your eating habits are getting in the way of you living a fulfilling life. That could be your action point, or it could be identifying the thoughts that are making you feel, anxious around food, or it could be, speaking to a friend about it. But it is actually taking action in a small way or a big way. And like you talk about momentum quite a lot, and once you start that process, it's kind of easier once you've taken those first kind of baby steps. And then the fifth point is, what have we got?
Value change.
Value change, yeah. So it's, as well as kind of creating change, we've got to understand that we've also got to appreciate kind of how far we've got on our journey. And even if we're not where we want to be, this change is an ongoing process. It's not like we're necessarily trying to reach a certain goal. It's about just being kind of open to this process. And sometimes I think it's really helpful to look back and to see how far you've come, and to actually find the lessons in your struggles, which is essentially what thriving is rather than being caught up in your struggles, it's taking the lessons and being able to grow from them. Last point in the Thrive model is enjoying the journey. And I think that's really important because when we go through change, I think a lot of us think in order for it to be worthwhile, it has to involve suffering and pain. Especially like with exercise, I think a lot of people think, oh gosh, I'm going to, if I want to reach whatever weight loss goal or whatever it is, it has to be painful. But actually, it can be a really enjoyable experience to start, discovering new parts of yourself, discovering new kind of, new values, new ways to exercise, new ways to eat, new ways to relate to the world. So it's, for me anyway, a lot of this journey has been about, okay, let's take my mind off these massive goals and just relax and enjoy my life.
Nick, I love it. I absolutely love it. And hopefully people can look at a couple of those steps and go, do you know what? I need to place a little bit more focus there. That's where I need to enable myself to move forward with greater momentum, more positive momentum. And I don't, me sharing aspects of my journey, I don't want to detract or make people feel pressured that any part of this should take a particular amount of time. We've talked about days, weeks, months and years at different aspects of both mine and Nick's journeys, and don't feel any pressure. Just let it evolve, roll with it. For me, it's be about going through these practices and processes daily, about taking responsibility that it will be a daily practice. It won't be something that I'll try and get it done at the weekend. Like if you're committed to the process of changing and moving forward, then we start with the daily habit.
Yeah, and it's also, like you said, it's not we're not trying to master anything. This is a kind of endless exploration of personal growth and personal transformation, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. And I always say to people, there's many paths to the top of the mountain, and you've got to find what makes you feel good, and those things in your life that make you really feel alive.
I think an interesting way to look at so much of this is any expert or any individual that someone looks to for inspiration and thought behind a particular topic area, is that expert will always feel like there's just so much to explore. Like if you think about yoga now for yourself, exactly, you're still excited about yoga. You're thinking, oh my God, I want to learn about this guy's perspective on yoga and this person and this person. And, I am constantly looking at nutrition and personal development and all the things that I'm interested in. And if you look at some of the people, the greats that we look up to, like, if I think about the people that I look up to, like, Richard Branson in business, who just is like innovating every day of his life and still learning and playing. I love Tim Ferriss's perspective in that he's just always, a human guinea pig. Like, what can he learn about himself and the body and the mind? Like, people that we look up to are always moving forward, and they feel that they're literally virgins in their trade. So, don't feel bad that you don't know as much as someone else, or you're behind someone else on your journey, because that person is still feeling as excited and vulnerable about their journey as you are.
Yeah, and I think the best way I can describe it is, over the past, 10 years through going through illness, recovery, heartbreak, loss, the stuff that we all going to go through in life is, if you can use it in the right way, it feels almost like, when you just get out from a nap, or you just kind of, when you get up in the morning and you feel a little bit groggy, that's the level that kind of, before you start really, doing your inner work, that's what it feels like. And then you start kind of, you have a shower or you have a coffee, and then you wake up. And so it's almost like that's transition in life. And every time I learn something new, it's like, oh my gosh, that, this time last year, it was almost like I was still half asleep and still in that groggy state. And now I've learned this whole new thing, and I feel like I'm waking up a bit more. And I just kind of think, I'm 27. I've got how many years left to live? Hopefully, like if I can, keep exploring and keep learning and keep discovering stuff. It's not like there is this end goal in sight. It's like we're just learning, and we're just kind of, making the most of kind of every moment of every day.
Nick, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been amazing. I know we've overrun.
Thank you for having me.
I hope someone's not knocking at your door saying, "Oh, we've got an appointment," because I know we've grossly overrun. But I was fascinated by talking with you. Your book, Thrive Through Yoga, is available in all the usual places like the Amazon machine and
Amazon, Waterstones, Smiths, all good bookshops.
Nice. It's a beautiful book, absolutely beautiful book, and your last book's brilliant as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's just so different. I mean, this one is Thrive Through Yoga is what I'm about now. This is much more me. It has a lot of meaning to it. It's got 21 different meditations in it, 21 heart-centered explorations, 21 yoga routines, each tapping into kind of a different theme, from self-awareness to overcoming perfection to transforming yourself. And it's all the tools that help me to heal and help me to grow, and that I now use with my clients. And I really hope it has the potential to change a lot of people's lives.
Well, Nick, I think you've changed a lot of people's lives today. I think with this podcast, it will hopefully help a surprising amount of people. So thank you very much for your time, your generosity and your love on the show today. If people want to find you on social media, maybe keep up to date with what you're doing. I know you do some workshops now and again.
Yeah.
Where do people find you online?
I'm generally just under Nicola Jane Hobbs for everything. So, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook is all Nicola Jane Hobbs. And then my website is nicolajanehobbs.com.
There we go. Nice and easy. Again, thank you, Nicola. For everyone that is listening to the show, I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've come over from Nicola's side of the fence, you've never listened to the show before, please do have a delve into some of the other 295 episodes that we've recorded to date. There's lots of different stuff on this podcast. Either way, if you've enjoyed this this podcast, and you think it will help someone else, maybe point them in that direction. Maybe send them an email, send them a Facebook Messenger, say, hey, just listen to this podcast. I think it will really resonate with you and help you, and send it on. Pay the information forward. These podcasts, I think, can really enrich the experience that people have from life, because podcasts are something that you can just sit back and enjoy. You might be driving in your car or going for a walk, and I think sometimes podcasts actually catch you in a place where you can think creatively and be in a good place to actually absorb the information. So pay it forward, keep sharing this information. That's it from me. I will see you next week with either another amazing guest, or it will be myself and Tom. I haven't thought that far ahead, but I trust you. It will be another great show. Nicola's still there in the background. Nicola, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. And Nick, keep going on and doing great things with your work. You're inspiring lots of people. Otherwise, everyone else, stay awesome, and I will see you next week. Goodbye. Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 297.